Hey there, I'm Felicia. Thank you for joining me. This week, we're continuing in our series, The Secret to Answered Prayers. We've talked about our capacity to receive from God and how it's tied to our faith. We've talked about our willingness to surrender to God because He's always willing to answer prayers that are in alignment with His perfect will. We've talked about the importance of obedience and having a quick response time when God gives us instructions. And last week, we talked about the importance of endurance and how our faith has to remain regardless of our circumstances, because many miss out on the blessings because they quit too soon. And this week, we're going to continue with the fifth key, the power of our words and our imagination. Now, be sure to stick around to the end to hear why a former witch doctor says that many Christians don't have their prayers answered. Our words and our imaginations are vital to having our prayers answered, and the enemy will often use these things against us to get us out of position so we miss out on our divine breakthrough. Often, when our faith doesn't endure, it's because there has been a seed of doubt planted in our minds, watered, and fertilized until it's full grown. The enemy whispers these lies to us until we think on them, and then we believe them. Think about this. If you hear a rumor about someone over and over, you believe it, don't you? Well, it's the same with the devil. He brings these thoughts to us, and they could come as whispers to our mind. They could come from other people. They could come as something we've seen or we've heard, and we begin to think on them until we begin to believe them. And pretty soon, if gone unchecked, we come into agreement with them and they become our reality. We take them on as our identity. I have been so guilty of this in my life. There are areas that I have accepted and come into agreement with a characteristic, a trait, or a diagnosis. And I've taken this on and believed it and accepted it as part of my identity, even though it contradicts what God says and who He says that I am. If we want to have our prayers answered, we have got to shut down our mind, anything that contends with our faith. Several weeks ago, I shared with you guys a definition of unbelief that rocked my world. Unbelief comes by considering anything contrary to the Word of God. In 2 Corinthians 10:5, the Apostle Paul is talking about spiritual warfare. And in this passage, he says, casting down arguments and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ. So our thought life is a part of our spiritual warfare. There is a battlefield in our mind. Let's read Joshua 1:8. Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. The word meditate here is from the Hebrew word dagah. It means to imagine, to meditate, to mourn, to mutter, to roar, to soar, to speak, or study. So our thoughts are tied to our imagination. Paul is telling us here to take every thought captive, which means you have to meditate on good things and you have to guard your mind. Philippians 4:8 says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. So let's put this in the context of having our prayers answered. If you're praying for healing, but you're thinking on and speaking words that contradict that, you're not going to see your prayers answered. Job 3:25 says, for the thing I greatly feared has come upon me, and what I dreaded has happened to me. Now, even science backs up the fact that what we think on and we meditate on and we imagine influences our reality. And I'm not talking about manifestation and law of attraction. Those are new age counterfeits based on biblical principles. But do you know someone who's always negative? Like everything out of their mouth is worst case scenario. They're always the victim. Life happens to them and not for them. And I'm not talking about trials and tribulations because we're all going to go those. I'm talking about like self-fulfilling prophecy. Well, the law of seed time and harvest from the Bible tells me that if I plant tomatoes, I'm going to grow tomatoes, not corn. Well, Jesus says in Matthew 12:34, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So if you're planting seeds of doubt or fear or meditating on the worst case scenario or all the injustices done to you, then that is what is going to grow in your life. The imagination is such a powerful tool, and it can be used for good or it can be used for evil. Because if we think on something long enough, we begin to believe it. And if we begin to believe something, we begin to speak it. And what does the Bible say about our words? Well, Proverbs 18:21 says, death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit. And Psalms 141 verse 3 says, set a guard over my mouth, Lord. Keep watch over the door of my lips. There have been so many times in my life that I've been guilty of this. It is sometimes hard to see it in ourselves and easier to see it in others. But I've been to the place where I've been praying and believing for something, but then I realize that I'm speaking or I'm thinking on things that contradict my prayers. And this is an open door for us to have doubt. And then our prayers are going to go unanswered. But when we come into agreement with the lies that the enemy tells us, he has legal access to steal from us. And we know that John 10:10 says the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. So think about your life. Are you spending the majority of your time talking and thinking about your obstacles and your circumstances? Are you constantly being afraid and thinking about what could happen? Are you coming into agreement or taking on an identity that contradicts what God has for you and who He says you are? When you're praying for God to meet a financial need, are you also living in fear and saying you're broke? I've been so guilty of this, but we have got to guard our words and our thoughts. A year or two ago, I heard this story. It was an interview from a pastor who'd gone to Africa, and he interviewed this other pastor who was a former witch doctor. And this witch doctor said that what he would do is he would go out really early in the morning before the sun rose, and he would sit and he would meditate and he would think on the words that he was about to say. He would imagine in his mind what it would look like when it came to pass. And he would do this until he believed that it was going to happen. So then he would make a covenant with the sun and he would declare the spell or the curse, and it would come to pass. You know, those who are in witchcraft, who are in New Age, who are in the occult, are having a lot more spiritual encounters and are more productive in the spirit realm than most Christians because they're more aware of it and they spend more time meditating on these things. Now, they have less power than us as believers, but often walk in more faith than we do and get more results. And according to that former witch doctor, it's because we as Christians are lazy. We aren't spending the time meditating on the Word of God or guarding our thoughts and our imagination. And we often lack an awareness of what is available to us as Christians. And we don't understand the power of our words and our imaginations. I urge you to seek God for revelation in this area, to do the really hard work of guarding your mouth and your imagination so that you're not negating your prayers. Thank you for spending some time with me today. I appreciate it. And I hope that you'll join me next week as we continue in this series, The Secret to Answered Prayers. Don't forget, like, share, subscribe, and comment.